Welcome. This is Marc Steiner right here on the Marc Steiner Show on the Real News Network. Good to have you with us this week. And as we've been covering and watching the news, you saw the results of what happened on the Supreme Court with Janus versus AFSCME, which kind of gutted public service unions in this country in terms of allowing employees to back out of paying union dues and more. And it was a horrendous decision, but really a decision that is part of a 30-year effort to dismember unions and to destroy the power unions had. It's a complex matter inside unions and out. And here in Maryland, where we're broadcasting from, as in many other states, we're wrestling with how to fund schools. There's a thing called the Kirwan Commission, which every state almost has their equivalent to the Kirwan Commission, wrestling with how to fund their schools and where the money comes from and what we expect of our schools. And we've seen the strikes all across this country, West Virginia, Oklahoma, in places people did not think teachers would walk out, and they walked out. So what does all that mean for the future? Well, today we are joined by the newly elected president of the Maryland State Education Association, which represents most of the teachers in Maryland, Cheryl Bost. And Cheryl, welcome. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
So where do we begin? Let's begin with you. So let's take a little just about yourself before we get into some of the heart of the issues nationally and locally and around education. You've been a school teacher for how long?
This is the beginning of my 30th year teaching.
30 years?
Yes.
Would you start when you were 10?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes.
So, and you taught at in a Baltimore County school.
Yes.
You were president of the Teachers Association of Baltimore County, called
Yes.
TAPCO. But you taught at a school in Essex the state wanted to take over.
Correct.
Essex being a small community on the east side of Baltimore County, a very working class district in our state. So talk a bit about that experience, the battle around closing, having your school being taken over.
Sure. Well, I came here from Pittsburgh after graduating and was placed at Mars Estates Elementary School. And I heard for a long time, oh, you're in a tough school. You're in a challenging school. 70% of our students live below the poverty line. 6 out of 10 started the year and then ended the year at a different school. So you often saw your attendance book go on forever. But I have to say, it gave me the most rewards teaching at that challenging school. Students had trauma, had needs, and several years into it, the state did want to come in and take us over based on test scores. All they looked at is test scores. And we joined with the community, and we said, no, we're not going to let that happen. We came up with an alternative plan.
Who's the we who said this?
Well, we all got together, the staff, and we even had some support at the central office level in Baltimore County, because Baltimore County did not want their first school to be taken over by the state of Maryland.
Right.
And we knew we had a lot of potential. It's a school that is challenging, but people stay for 30 years because we have such a connection to the community and the need. So in our school with such need, we said, no, we're going to do things a little bit differently. And we had the opportunity to do a needs assessment where they asked us, the people in the classrooms, what do your students need? What will turn around this school? And we did turn it around because we received extra social workers to really deal with the student and the family, not just when they come into our doors to learn. School counselors to deal with trauma and the things that our students were seeing. We even had a local bar offer bicycles and other things for raffles to get parents to come in. We visited churches. We offered after-school programs and summer camps. I started a summer camp in connection with the YMCA. So we really did a lot of outreach. And within a few years, because it can't be done in 1 year, unfortunately, too many reforms look at 1 year.
Right.
But after a few years of this commitment and really buy-in from the community, we turned the school around. We closed the achievement gap between black and white students. Suspensions were lowered, and the school climate really did improve. It became a community school. We worked with the Police Athletic League that was on our property, and so then it became a school where everybody wanted to come. But we still had the poverty, but we showed with lower class sizes and these supports. And that really is what I think is missing in education, and that's why I'm happy to become the new president, so to give our educators a voice, because we used our voice to make a change, and I think that's what's missing today.
So what does that say to you about the state of our public schools and what we need? I mean, we're broadcasting here in a studio that's in Baltimore City, which is not part of your union structure, part of the American Federation of Teachers. But regardless, it's clearly, you know, that when we talk about the need for social workers and psychologists and other people to back up students, tutors, and others in schools, that's what you did in one school because the teachers took hold and pushed it with the community.
Correct.
So what does that say about what we really need to do in terms of having this really overarching, all-encompassing look at what our schools need and what that takes?
Well, too often we have people making decisions for the schools that have never stepped a foot in the classroom. And what happened at Mars Estates could happen at every school, including Baltimore City, where we see more concentrated poverty. But it takes the willingness to listen. Instead, the federal government, through a race to the top, dictated mandates down and treated everybody the same. We have state, under Governor Hogan, treating everybody the same, even changing the calendar for the whole state, treats everybody the same. But we know our students in Garrett County, Baltimore City, Wacomico, they're different. And that's what happened at Mars Estates. They talked to us and said, what do your students need? The students at Thomas Johnson might need something different. The students at Annapolis High might need something else different. We keep doing this one size fits all, and we never really provide a level playing field for our students.
Who is the they who listen to you?
Sure. The they is our superintendent. Our
superintendent, the county schools.
Our county school board, our county superintendent. And they actually put in the resources, the money. But it wasn't just here's money. We said we need a social worker. We need extra planning time. We could identify our needs. We even went through additional training. I learned better how to become a reading teacher because of the deficits of my students. So we identified the needs instead of a superintendent or the state board of education or somebody coming in and saying, we think we know what you need. I
mean, that says so much about the need that we never talk about, or at least from my perspective here, having been in the school system myself years back, of teachers actually running their schools, as opposed to people from the outside telling teachers how to teach.
That's where I see my presidency. I've talked about bringing in a new labor movement into education, where educators, whether they're teachers, bus drivers, custodians, are the voices at the school, along with parents and students. But as you said, and we continue to say too often, it's school systems, you do this, or schools, you do that. And each one of them has a different population. After my time at Mars Estates, after being president, I went to a school named Pretty Boy Elementary School in the northern part of Baltimore County. Wasn't faced with poverty, wasn't faced with all the challenges. I could have a class of 30 students in my math class because they had parental support, they had transportation, they had everything. I couldn't do that at Mars Estates. Those students needed more one-on-one attention so that they could succeed. They all had the same potential. It's just what we needed to give them in school. And too often people, as I said, making the decisions, politicians, Board of Education members, they think about when they were in school. Well, when I went to school, there was 35 students and we did this. Things have changed. Those are the people who still maybe have a flip phone instead of a smartphone, or things have changed, technology has increased, and the demands of our students when they graduate has increased. So we need to treat them different. And we're expected in the classroom to treat Mark as Mark and maybe Sarah as Sarah. But unfortunately, they treat all the schools and the systems the same.
So when we talk about changing the union, the nature of unions, let me take a step backwards again about you.
Sure.
So I understand, little bird told me this, flew down from the tree.
Those birds.
Those little birds, they say it, that's everything. Be careful now.
They do, they're watching all the time.
That you come from a union household. Your father was air traffic controller in PAPCO when Reagan tried to destroy the union.
Yes.
We can talk a bit about that. So that's the home you come from. You're from Pittsburgh, and there is a Bost building because your grandfather worked in the Homestead Strike of 1892 and worked with the steelworkers.
Yes.
So you have you have a lineage here.
I do have a lineage of the union movement, and as you're growing up, you don't always realize that as a youngster. But when I look back, I think my path was set a long time before I realized it. Right. So we do have a Bost building in Homestead, and it's my great-great-grandfather housed some of the media and other things that happened during the amalgamated strike between the Frick and everybody who came in to bust the union with the U.S. Steel, the Pinkertons. Yes. My grandfather then was a pattern maker in the mill, and he had a Pinkerton billy club. That as a memento that had been passed down through the family, and he had it on the back of his front door, as you know, some people carry baseball bats or things. My grandfather had a Pinkerton billy club there, and so that's all now in the Bost Building Museum. And my dad was an air traffic controller when he came out of the Air Force. He's the first ever to retire out of Pittsburgh International. He retired, unfortunately, when President Reagan busted the union of air traffic controllers. My dad did all the informational picketing. We had lots of things sent to our house. It was, as kids, we were well aware of what the union represented for our family. And so as soon as I became a teacher, I joined the union. And then I slowly realized the collective voice that the union gives workers. And really the middle class was built on that collective union. So it's very sad that in this time, unions are under attack. But I think, as you said, my lineage brought me to the place I am today.
Well, so let's talk a bit about where that takes us. I mean, yes. I opened this segment talking about Janus versus AFSCME, the Supreme Court decision that allowed people to be represented by the union but not pay their dues to the union.
Correct.
Right? Which really guts the union budgets, and it was funded by hundreds of millions of dollars from very wealthy people that are associated in many ways around Secretary DeVos, the Secretary of Education, others that have been wanting to kind of go after public education for a long time, and unions. So with this push to really gut the power of unions, and clearly this will affect you and your union because it'll mean that money you expected to come in from membership may not come in the way you thought, right?
Correct.
So you're the new president, so what does this take the unions in the state and around the country?
With the Janus case, as you said, we will lose some income based on people who didn't pay their fair share of dues. So they paid for, representation, but not the whole piece of membership. But we have a strong membership here in Maryland, and we have been out surveying our educators, and overwhelmingly, they want to stay part of the union because they see the power in the union to help working conditions, salaries, and collective bargaining. And all of that trickles down to help our students. When we have the best teachers in front of them, and we have custodians and bus drivers that aren't working, hopefully 3 or 4 or 5 jobs because we can get them better wages, we have a better school system. So, as you said, unions are under attack. There's been about 26 cases in line through different wealthy and corporate funded streams to go after the unions. But it is all to go after the middle class and continue that divide between the wealthy and those who don't have as much money. But we really see we're at a kind of a tipping point when we look at West Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma, Colorado, North Carolina. People are now saying, wait, we have to take our voices back and we have to stand up for our students and our rights. So
how do you do that? I mean, whether it's locally here, and as I talked to folks before we had this conversation on the air, this group Mackinac is going after teachers, trying to tell them that they no longer have to pay and to turn against the union, and that's a group that was funded in part by the DeVos family, right? So the question is, how do you respond to that, and what is the tactic, what is the strategy to strengthen the union and have its voice heard and really have an effect?
I think it's 2 parts. One is to point out to those that are sending them emails from Mackinac that this is Betsy DeVos and her family and her wealthy comrades trying to impose vouchers, tax credits, and other things for the wealthy and private schools. They're not an interest in saving our public education, which we know is an equalizer in this country. When all students get to have a public education, it equals the playing field. So we will continue to share our voice. We provide professional development for our members, but really it's that collective voice. When we can come out and say, this is what our students need, this is what our schools need, people want to be a part of that energy and that collective voice to make it better. And we see that as the way that we will continue to grow our membership, by bringing people into that movement where they're heard and they can say what's best for students. It's not going to be, well, you get insurance or you get this, because we are really in it for the love of our students and we want to make a difference. And I think that's the way that we're going to grow our union and grow our voice in Maryland.
So speaking of Maryland, since we're here and you're president of the union here in Maryland There's a thing called the Kirwan Commission,
Yes.
and other states, as I said earlier, have their equivalents. Battles going on about how you fund and what happens to public education. So the Kirwan Commission is trying to figure out how you fund schools in this state. Let's talk a bit about that. We had before that the Thornton Commission, which was supposed to ensure equity in our school system and racial equity. It did not do that.
No.
By any stretch of the imagination. Baltimore City, other school systems where black and people of color had a dominant population in our schools, did not get the funding they needed.
Yeah.
So where's Kirwan going to take us? I mean, and why are they taking so long to make a decision? even the Republican governor asked, why are you taking so long?
Right.
Why are they taking so long? So what do you think? What do we expect here?
Well, I was here for the Thornton Commission, and I agree with you. We never really saw the funding and the activity that we needed to address our most impoverished students in our most challenging schools. So analysis, an independent analysis says we're already $3 billion behind in that funding, and we need to catch up. So the Kirwan Commission this time is not just looking at funding, but they're looking at programs within the school like career technology education. They're looking at teacher certification, planning time. So I think they have taken on a large part of education, and we're watching to see what they do, because again, we don't see the educator voice shown prominently on the commission, which we would have liked to have seen. But we will look to see what their recommendations come up with. But then it's going to be up to the legislature to really fund our schools, as you said, with adequacy and equity. We have too many achievement gaps. Opportunities are not open to our black and brown students. We know by statistics that they're not into our AP classes and IB classes at the same rate white students and Asian students are entering those classes and being successful and getting the support that they need to be successful. We can see by some of the buildings here in Baltimore City that they're not fit for students to go to school in. So we need to put money into our facilities and technology, science labs, and other things. So we're hoping that the Kirwan Commission can look at how we do that funding and then really get the legislature to figure out how we're going to make it equitable and raise those students who seem to have been forgotten and are not meeting the needs.
So one of the things the Kirwan Commission talks about, and other commissions around the country I've read about have talked about, they compare their schools to high-performing schools around the globe. Right. Finland, Sweden, Japan, wherever that might be. And so they said, we can pick this out of here, we pick this out of there, and we're going to make the schools work because we can use their policy programs. But the bottom line is, the reason, take for example, Finnish schools are so good or Norwegian schools are so good is because they actually fund the school system. And they put money in the schools, and they pay their teachers more than we can even imagine teachers being paid in this country. So I mean, so what does that say about as a reality check?
It's kind of going back to that one size fits all. What works in Finland or Singapore might not necessarily work here in the United States or here in Maryland. The other part of that, besides how much they pay their educators and fund education, they don't have the level of poverty that we have even here in Maryland. So they don't allow their children to live in such dire straits and in poverty. And we teach all of our students, no matter if they have special needs, they speak different languages, and you don't see that in all of the other countries that we're being compared to. So we can't say, oh, well, we fit some of the similar demographics, we're going to fit here. It's a different system, it's a different society, and we often are asking our schools to fix the issues that society has, poverty, funding, respect for educators, instead, and we want to look at all of that together.
So here in the state, there's a ballot measure coming up, which I think is really important.
Yes.
I mean, this battle took place over what to do with all the casino money. Almost every state in the union now has casinos at some level or another. And where does that money go? So the Governor Hogan at first was saying that this money can be used for education. That means we can use the money for education somewhere else.
Correct.
But that battle was kind of won, or was it, in terms of there's a ballot coming up saying that casino money will be put into education. So where's that?
Right. So the Fix the Fund Act did pass in the legislature thanks to the General Assembly. And that will be on the ballot, as you said, in November. So we're hoping that Maryland residents do support that initiative. And this will now supplement education funding. Even this past year, Governor Hogan took $300,000 that would have gone to education, used the education trust fund and supplanted that money so that he could spend it elsewhere. So we're never making gains in our spending. We've hit a stagnant top. So when the governor says, oh, I fully funded education, he's fully funding it at bad formula levels or past formula levels, and he's not enhancing the money that is needed. We talked about psychologists and school counselors. This state alone is short 1,500 school counselors based on national industry standards, and we're short over 500 school psychologists. So we need the governor and the legislature to use Kerwin and figure out the funding so that we can pay for this. And I'll just add, the casino will only be part of that money.
Right.
So it's going to be a tough decision for folks to decide how to pay for it. But that seems to be a barrier at times. But it wasn't a barrier when the governor said he wanted to put $7 billion aside for Amazon. So Marylanders and our political...
which we didn't get.
Which we didn't get, right. But it's ironic that we had that money and nobody said, well, where did you get that money?
And where is it now?
And where is it? And how are you funding it? But yet when we're looking at $3 billion for schools, oh, wow, that's going to be a burden and we can't do that. No, we need to invest in our students and we need to invest in education.
Well, Cheryl Bost, it's really good to see you again, Cheryl.
It's great
Lovely
to be
have
here.
you in the studio here. And good luck in your tenure as president of the Maryland State Education Association. And again, once again, great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to start this new adventure.
Go on to it.
Thank you.
And folks, we're going to be covering labor unions a lot over the next year, and where labor unions have come from, where they are now, where they're going, what this push against them means, and what this new struggle, where will it take the unions? We'll be talking to union leaders, including Cheryl Bost and others from here and across the country to figure out where unions are going and how it's going to affect this nation. So once again, thanks for being part of this program today and watching us. And I'm Marc Steiner for the Marc Steiner Show right here on the Real News Network. We'll be talking soon.